Well, hey, welcome to Crosspoint. My name's Kurt, and we are so excited to join us today. Whether you're sitting in front of a device in a living room, maybe you're even in bed, or perhaps a coffee shop or a bar, we just want you to know we're excited that you are tuning in today. And happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there today. We want you to know we're so appreciative for the role you've played, the mother figures in our lives, the ways that you've helped us become who we are today, or that you're helping your children become who they are today. I know it wasn't easy, and if you're a mom actively parenting right now, it's not always easy, but thank you for pushing through the hills, the valleys, through the good times as well as the not so good to help us become the best version of ourselves. And so we just want to say thank you. In fact, we're going to take a look at this today and how God continues to help us become the best future you want to be. Now, before we do that, we'd love to hear from you, and the best way to do that is to scan the QR code here, fill out the form next to the stream. If that's easier, take a moment, tell us about yourself. If there's anything that you would like us to know, ways you'd like to connect, or if there's a way we can pray for you. And if it's your first time with us, let us know that as well. And we've got a small gift coming your way in the mail this week, just as a way of saying thank you for joining us today. Now, as you're doing that, there's a lot going on over the next few weeks, some really cool ways to connect. And so let me tell you about them. Number one, next weekend is baby child dedications right here at the Crosspoint campus in all weekend services. If you'd like to find out more about how to participate in this amazing moment, not only for you as parents, but also for your children, just scan the QR code, let us know on your connection card, and we'll be in touch with you this week. Second, Crosspoint Student Ministries is inviting all 7th through 12th grade students to celebrate the start of summer at the end of school year bash. Man, can't believe it's the end of the school year. It's an exciting time for students to come together. There's gonna be a safari-themed party filled with outdoor games, competition, food, great people, a whole lot of fun. And so we invite you to deck out in your favorite party animal gear. I don't know what that is, like lions, tigers, and I don't know, bears? Come join us at the Crosspoint campus on Sunday, May 21st from 6 to 7:30. And then number three, Memorial Day weekend is right around the corner, which is kind of a big deal here in Indianapolis. Now, if you have weekend plans for the big race, or perhaps going to the lake or travel sports, or you're just trying to catch up on some yard work over the holiday weekend, we want to invite you to kick off the holiday weekend early with us right here at the Crosspoint campus for the Thursday evening early weekend service. And we've got a special Carb Day after party with dogs, brats, local brews right here in the Commons, which is sure to be lots of fun and a great kickoff to race weekend in Indianapolis. And then Sunday, we're gonna have one service, a special schedule that weekend, one service at 9 a.m. only on May 28th with all kids and students environments open. And we're gonna have a lemonade stand to kick off the start of summer with free lemonade for everyone on Sunday morning. So make your plans now to connect with us on this fun holiday weekend. And of course, you can catch us right here online as well all weekend long. All right, we're off and running, and we've got a great service today. Now, have you ever wondered what the storms of life, the difficult seasons, the lost dreams, the ruined plans have to do with the future you? If so, I want you to know that you're what I would call normal. In fact, I'm excited you're here today because we're gonna talk about how these seasons actually contribute to the best you can be. So to get us headed that way, here's the Crosspoint House Band with Ben Rector's Living My Best Life.
Living my best life. Living my best life. This house is now a litany. The things I thought I'd never be. Man who has opinions on and out of me, among other things. I used to think I'd missed the road, the crushing fame and sold out shows. Now I'm singing head, shoulders, knees and toes like I'd forgotten them. But I'm alive, baby, I'm thriving. Oh yeah, I'm living my best life. driving. Yeah, yeah. I'm living my best life. Wake up when the sunrise does not look a thing like I thought that it would, but I've been getting my steps in, and I sleep with my best friend. It's the best that it has been in a long time. I'm living my best life. Living my best life. I'm living my best life, best that I can. No worry or stress time, 'cause I'm done with it. I'm as light as can be. I'm as fresh as a breeze, right where I wanna be. So you need to find me. I'll be living my best life, waking up with the sunrise, looking at things like what the actual hell. But I've been counting my blessings, and I sleep with my best friend. It's the best that it has been in a long time. It's the best that it has been in a long time. I'm living my best life. Oh, I'm living my best life. Living my best
Love it. How about that cover by the Crosspoint Band? Isn't that awesome? I love that song. Ben Rector is one of my favorite artists, and he's a great entertainer if you're looking for a good live show. And, you know, I love the line. I don't know if you caught it, but he says at one point, you know what they say about the best laid plans. And that's really where we're headed today. We're going to be having some conversations about that. But before we get there, my name's Abbie. If we've not met, I'm so excited that you're joining us today, whether you're here in the venue or joining us online. Let's give it up for those that are joining online from wherever you're coming from today. Yeah, we're so excited that you're here. As Kurt mentioned, happy Mother's Day weekend and also happy Grand Prix weekend. I am, for one, very excited that there were Indy cars on the Speedway, or on the track on the Speedway this weekend. If you're joining online from outside of Indianapolis and you have no idea what any of that means, don't worry about it, but it is a big deal. So you should check it out. But, you know, speaking of Mother's Day especially and of best laid plans, you know, a couple of years ago, I was planning a trip to Miami with some of my girlfriends, and we realized that the date that we were looking at fell over Mother's Day weekend. And I wasn't exactly sure how my husband would feel about that, so I called him and was like, you know, hey, babe, this is what we're looking at. How would you feel if I was gone over Mother's Day? He paused for a minute, and then he said, so you're saying you would be happy and I wouldn't have to do anything? Sounds ideal. And I laughed and agreed and went ahead and booked the flight. And, you know, a few weeks later when the trip came, it was so great to have that time with the girlfriends that were a part of that trip, to have the time away, to be at the beach without kids that I was responsible for. It was an awesome trip. And on Mother's Day, the actual day, we had made reservations at this really cool restaurant that we were excited to check out. And before dinner, we went to this beautiful happy hour spot overlooking the water and the city. We had these amazing oysters. And it was just one of those moments where like everything is right in the world. You know, those times. And, you know, so then in between, as, you know, we're leaving happy hour, we're heading to the restaurant, and I decided that it would be a really good idea for us to ride some Lime scooters. You know, those really terrifying electric scooters in this strange city that we were in. And, you know, a couple of my friends were hesitant, but I can be pretty persuasive, and so I convinced them this is the move. This is a great idea. So we hop on the scooters and we start making our way toward the restaurant, and at one point we have to cross the street. And so thankfully there was a crosswalk that, you know, actually one of my friends just went right across the street. We're like, that's crazy. We're going to the crosswalk. So we go to the crosswalk, there's big blinking lights, and I get halfway across, and then all of a sudden, I find myself flipping through the air before landing on the pavement. There was a driver that hadn't been paying any attention, and I had about a split second when I noticed that she was coming at me full speed to decide what to do and really no good options available. And, thankfully I walked away from that crash without any significant injuries, but it really shook me up. And it definitely was not a part of the plan. I spent my last day on the beach like this. It took me about an hour to walk from our condo to the beach after I'd wrapped my foot all up, and had a very fun time hobbling through the airport to get home by myself. Sometimes the best laid plans just turn out differently than we expect. And today, as we continue our series, The Future You, we're going to talk about these moments in our lives when suddenly we are hit with circumstances that we did not see coming, that have a way of altering our plans. Over the last few weeks, if you've been tuning in with us or here in the venue, we've been talking about how do you move from the you that you are right now into the future you. And we've unpacked how what we believe about God and about ourselves has a major impact on how we envision the future and the kind of future that we're heading toward. We've talked about the reality that it is our actions, not our intentions, that actually determine our destination, and how there is great power in taking small steps over time. Last week, we spent some time imagining what could change in our life if instead of focusing so much energy on developing our weaknesses, instead we started to get intimate with our strengths and really lean into building our strengths, recognizing that we all have unique strengths that we bring into the world. And I don't know about you, but I have loved this series so far. It's been so practical. It's been shifting already, kind of how I am prioritizing my days, what I'm doing each day. And I hope that you have had the same experience, that you have felt as empowered as I have to make some decisions today that will shape the future you that you are becoming and the direction that you want your life to go, ultimately toward becoming who you were made to be. If you missed any of those previous weeks, I can't encourage you enough to go back, check them out, listen, watch on our website or on our podcast. But today, I want to kind of just note from the beginning that some of what we're going to talk about, in light of what we've talked about over these last several weeks, may feel like it conflicts a little bit, but it really doesn't. See, there's this tension that we have to hold as we consider the future versions of ourselves that we're heading toward. All of what we've talked about so far is true. And it's also true that sometimes our plans fall apart. No matter how intentionally we build toward the future, we all have moments when suddenly it becomes clear that our future is not going to be what we thought it would. Moments when we have to face the reality of how much of our life is out of our control. For some of us, this weekend in particular has a way of bringing this tension to the surface. Maybe Mother's Day tends to stir up grief for you about how the future isn't going to be what you once thought it would. Perhaps because you are reminded of the loss of your mom or the loss of a child. Maybe it reminds you of the pain that you feel over the state of your family, over relationships that are just not what you wish they could be. Maybe today you find yourself with the heart-wrenching longing to become a parent. And it's a feeling you cannot escape this weekend. If you have complicated feelings around Mother's Day, I want you to know that you are not alone. I too have some sensitive feelings about this weekend. Last year, I found myself unexpectedly just in tears all of a sudden as I was casually chatting with a person that I had just met here as we were serving together in Upstreet. It was one of my more embarrassing moments here at Crosspoint so far, although certainly not the most embarrassing, which maybe someday I'll tell you that story. But parenting in general is a prime example of situations in our lives that force us to recognize that we do not have complete control over where our future is heading. This begins from the moment you consider the possibility of becoming a parent, and it continues all the way through. A friend of mine from whom I've learned so much about navigating infertility and adoption and unexpected pregnancy, not to mention all the career and leadership lessons I've learned from her. She's really a boss. She once said to me, "It seems to me that what every parenting journey has in common is that the story never unfolds the way that you expect. Those words have stuck with me over the years because they continue to ring true in my story and in every story of people that I know and encounter. You know, I also love how Andy Samberg describes the unexpected ways that your life changes after becoming a parent with a little different tone than we've been talking in. Check this out. All right, any non-parents in the room, just disregard that. It's heaven. We want you to join us, but maybe some of us can relate to what he's saying there. You know, we have other moments in our lives too, outside of the parenting realm, when we have to reckon with the realization that our future is not headed in the direction that we thought it was. Maybe you've experienced this when a relationship that you thought would stand the test of time suddenly falls apart. Or when you received a rejection from a school or a job that led you to a place where you had to totally reconsider the plan of where you thought you were going. Maybe you've had moments when you realize that what used to fit just doesn't fit anymore. Or perhaps today you're in a place in your career, in a dream, in your family, with a financial goal where you're just not at all where you expected to be by now. Perhaps you've been on the receiving end of an unexpected diagnosis that has radically altered your life. Or maybe you've been derailed by grief over the loss of someone that you love. Unfortunately, none of us make it through life without encountering moments like this. And so the question is, what do we do when the future we were headed toward falls apart? We're going to look at a story today about a woman who was exactly in this place. She was sitting in the aftermath of a loss that had derailed the direction of her life. Before we look directly at her story, a little bit of background. This is a story that we find in the book of John, in the New Testament, in the Bible. And in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, we encounter a lot of different women named Mary. Mary had to be on the very top of the top baby names chart of the first century BCE, kind of like Liam and Olivia in 2022. So the Mary that we're maybe most familiar with is Jesus' mom. But that's not who we're talking about today. This Mary is a different one, but she was also a woman who was very close to Jesus. We often refer to her as Mary Magdalene, which identifies where she was from, the Galilean fishing village called Migdol. And this is an image by these artists called the modern saints that just kind of reimagine what different people from the scripture and church history would look like if they were living today. So I love that image. But you know, when we think about Mary Magdalene, there are tons of legends that have developed about her over the course of history. But here are some things that we know about her for sure. We know that she was a woman who had been healed by Jesus and then went on to follow him from that day forward. She was also a person who financially invested in the work that Jesus was doing, and she joined in. She was a part of the work and the mission. And unlike the 12 male disciples of Jesus, who we hear about a lot more often, Mary stayed by Jesus' side to the very end. She watched Jesus take his last breath. And as Jesus died, so did the vision of where Mary thought her life was headed. She had given everything up to follow him. And where we're picking up the story today, we find her not only grieving the loss of someone that she loved, but also grieving the death of a dream, in the reckoning with the sudden realization that the future would not be what she had thought. The gospel account of John describes the scene like this. He says, early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. So she ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus has loved, who we think is John. And she said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb. We don't know where they have put him." And so all three of them run to the tomb. This is where we get this subtle, humble brag where John's like, "By the way, I'm a faster runner than Peter," which is just classic. And so they get to the tomb and they see that the tomb is in fact empty. And at this point, all of them assume that what has happened is that someone has come and stolen the dead body of Jesus. And so they see it, the men head back, but Mary lingers a little longer. It says Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she stooped and looked in. When she turned to leave, she saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. And then she turned to him and cried, "Teacher." And then Jesus says this strange thing in response to her. He says, "Don't cling to me." Why would Jesus say this to her? To understand, first we need to consider the bigger picture of what's happening in this moment. See, this is the Easter story. This is the moment when the world discovers, first through Mary, that though Jesus had been brutally killed just 3 days before, death did not have the final word. Jesus had come back to life. He had been resurrected. And you know, there's this tendency when we talk about the death and resurrection of Jesus to talk about it as a story that has significance for us after this life. That it proves that we too can experience resurrection and spend life with God forever. And rightfully so. This is a huge deal. This is great news. But what we often miss is the power that this story is meant to have in our lives right now. See, the death and resurrection of Jesus is not just a story that we remember at Easter. It's not just an afterlife reality. It is the rhythm that we follow throughout our lives. This is what Jesus was talking about when he told his followers to take up their cross daily. He was explaining that life includes death after death after death after death. That sounds like a real downer for Mother's Day, but it's not as depressing as it may first appear. See, Jesus is not only pointing out this difficult reality of life, he models for us what to do in the face of death. See, the Easter story reveals to us that not all death is final. In fact, some deaths are necessary passages to new life. Nature reminds us of this every year. We just experienced it in the spring as we watched new life coming from seeds that had been buried in the ground. All winter long, they showed no sign of life. But then suddenly, a shoot, a flower budding, leaves returning to the trees. This is the rhythm that nature follows, that we are meant to follow too. See, understanding death and resurrection as a rhythm that we are meant to follow gives us a new lens to consider those moments that we talked about earlier. The moments in our lives when it seems like everything is falling apart and the future as we imagined it is no longer in reach. One of my favorite authors, Shauna Niequist, talks about it like this in one of her books, Savor. She writes, "Years ago, my friend Doug told me that the central image of the Christian faith is death and rebirth. I'd heard that before, but when he told me, I really thought about it for the first time, and I didn't agree. What I didn't understand until much later is that he wasn't speaking to me as a theologian or a pastor or an expert, but rather as a person whose heart had been broken and who had been brought back to life by the story God tells in all of our lives. When you haven't yet had your heart broken, the gospel isn't about death and rebirth or resurrection. It's about life and more life. It's about hope and possibility and a brighter future. And it is certainly about those things. But when you've faced some kind of death, the loss of someone you love dearly, the failure of a dream, the fracture of a relationship, you start understanding that central metaphor. rebirth, and new life become very, very important to you. Now I know that Doug was right. I know that death is real, and I trust that rebirth is real too. Life and more life, hope, possibility, a brighter future. That's what we all want, right? As we think about our futures, we all want the life part. But most of us have a limited understanding or a misunderstanding about how we actually get there. Let's look back at that story of Jesus and Mary at the tomb, because I think it gives us some important clues for how we get to the kind of future that we long for. We see, as the scene is set, that when Mary, there's some things here that I think we need to remember. We got to take ourselves out of knowing the end of the story and remember that when Mary got up before the sun that day and decided to head to the tomb, she had no idea what was about to happen. She didn't come looking for a resurrection. She didn't come expecting new life. She came to grieve. And in the same way, we have to give ourselves space to grieve the losses that we experience, to resist the urge to rush too quickly toward new life. This is a process that looks different for all of us. It's a process that looks different for each loss that we go through, but it is always a necessary part. It always involves allowing other people to come alongside us. Sometimes it means we need to have a professional to guide us along the way. Maybe today you are starting to realize that there is a death in your life that you have been working so hard to minimize, to push away, to justify why it's not really a big deal or why you've moved past it. I want to encourage you to pause and to consider, what might it look like for you today to create space for that grief, to invite someone else into your story? And remember, grieving may be grieving a someone, but it may also be grieving a something, a hope, a plan, a preferred future, an expectation, or a benchmark of where you thought you were going. It could be grieving the college experience that you thought you were going to have, or a relationship that you expected to be in, or a relationship you used to be in, a perspective, a position, a role, a season. There's so many things in our lives, so many losses that we have to grieve. And we cannot move forward toward the future versions of ourselves that we want to become if we do not first create space to grieve what we have lost. As we keep going in the story, we see another necessary piece of the process in Mary's story. We see it here in verse 14. Notice, there is something about Jesus that is different enough from who he had been 3 days earlier that Mary, one of his closest followers who had been following him for years, does not recognize him as he stands in front of her and even speaks with her. You know, oftentimes when I am in the midst of reckoning with some kind of death in my life, of what I thought the future would hold, what I really want, if I'm honest, is a solution that will put things back on course. What I really want is for everything to return to exactly the way that it was before. But what we see in Jesus is that we do not emerge on the other side the same person that we were. This process of death as a passage into new life toward resurrection and rebirth inevitably shapes and changes us. And the more we resist that change, the harder it will be for us to actually receive the new life that God is trying to offer us. Now we can understand why Jesus told Mary not to cling to him. He's warning her, Mary, if you cling to me the way that you once had me, you won't be able to receive the new reality that I am offering you, that's right in front of you. You know, for me, this is not hypothetical. This is a path that I've walked, especially over the last few years. 2019 to 2021 in particular held a lot of unexpected loss, a series of events that upended my ideas of where I thought my future was heading. And trust me, I definitely tried to cling. I did everything I could to try to recalculate, get back on track with the plans that I had envisioned. But it didn't work. I think it rarely does. And all that it did was make an already difficult season even harder to navigate. But that is not our only option. As you think about where you are right now, I wonder, is there anything in your life that you have kept on life support for too long? Is there something that you have been clinging to that may actually be preventing you from stepping into the future that God has for you? It can be so scary to let go. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm finding that it really is the only way that we experience resurrection. When we stop clinging, we become free to receive the future that we could not have imagined or manifested on our own. It is actually possible to walk confidently into the future. And we actually see a glimpse of how Mary gets there. The turning point in this story comes at verse 16, when Jesus calls Mary by name. Suddenly, she realizes that this is the same voice who had spoken her name so many times before, who had healed her and taught her, guided her and comforted her. This glimpse that we get into the relationship of Jesus and Mary reminds me of a psalm that has become particularly meaningful for me lately. It's a psalm of confidence that's super short and super profound, but it's one that honestly I don't remember hearing ever until recently. I think perhaps we don't talk about it all that much because we feel weird about the word weaned. It says weaned more than once, which rightfully so. I get that that's a awkward word. So what I want to ask you to do is just shake off the awkwardness of that so that we can actually see the power in what the psalmist is writing here. It starts like this. He says, "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great or too marvelous for me." I love how this psalm starts with the humility of recognizing what is in our control and what is not in our control. So often, I think what keeps us from walking confidently into the future is that we think we're supposed to be able to control more than we actually can. And so then we get really thrown off when circumstances cause us to force us to face the fact that we did not have as much control as we had hoped. I used to believe that what would give me confidence for the future was figuring it all out, getting a life plan, devising a strategy for exactly where I needed to go. And there's certainly value in planning and vision casting and making goals. But when we do that, we have to stay aware of our limits in the process, or we may find ourselves actually feeling less confident in the end. A few months ago, I heard an author named Suzanne Stabile on a podcast, and some of you have probably already heard me quote this because I found it to just be such a helpful image of this reality. She said, "The spiritual journey is like driving down a long, dark road. You can only see as far as the headlights, but they will get you the whole way home." This is what the psalmist is doing here, guiding us to right size our vision, not looking too high, not trying to look too far ahead, not occupying ourselves with things that are beyond us. This is the first step. As we keep reading, the psalmist says this, "But I have calmed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, my soul is like the weaned child that is with me." I warned you, that word was coming twice. Let me give you a little context to understand the kind of relationship with God that the psalm is pointing to. When I was pregnant, I had a lot of people talk to me about how incredible it was that my babies would recognize my voice as soon as they were born. And that is a phenomenal thing. It's really cool. But what I experienced that you may be familiar with too is that when they were first born, a familiar voice was not the comfort that they were looking for. Newborns are wired for survival. When they are upset, typically what calms them down is meeting their physical need. And it doesn't matter all that much to them who the person is that's meeting the need, as long as they get what they're looking for. They are not crying for their mom, they are crying for milk most of the time. But it doesn't stay that way. As babies grow older, as they experience their needs being provided for time and time again, trust is formed. And a relationship begins to develop with the people who are providing for them the most often. This shift in that relationship happens about the age of a weaned child, like the psalm mentions. And so when I read this a couple of months ago, it hit me really hard because as I was reading it, my 7-month-old daughter had just fallen asleep in my arms. She had recently reached the point where simply being held by me or by my husband was finally enough to just calm her down. This is the kind of relationship that we were made to have with God. Trusting God like a child trusts their mother. Developing this kind of relationship with God gives us the ability to walk confidently into the future despite all that remains unknown. The point of the psalm is this: you don't have to keep anxiously working to get what you need, because you are held by a God who already knows both your lack and your longings. You can find confidence by settling in to the arms of the one who is the source of your life and the provider of all that you need. Maybe, like Mary, the most important thing that you can do to set yourself on a path toward the best possible future is learning to recognize what it sounds like when God calls you by name. This is the power that I have found in following the rhythm of death and resurrection instead of resisting it. As I have released old things that I've been clinging to, my trust has grown as I have experienced the faithfulness of God providing things that I didn't even realize that I needed, that I never could have experienced if I hadn't let go of those old things, allowed them to die, if I hadn't opened myself up to being changed by the process of grief. I have come out on the other side with a new confidence that is rooted not in the certainty about what the future will hold. It's a confidence that's rooted in a much stronger foundation. We can walk confidently into the future because we are held by a God who knows exactly what we need. As you take a moment to consider what this would look like for you, I want to invite you to spend some time wrestling with these questions. Is there anything in your life that you've been keeping on life support for too long? Is there a change that it's time for you to accept, to let go? And the second is this: what would it look like? What is a step that you could take to develop deeper trust that God will guide you into the future? This question may lead you back to where we actually started this series, to the way that what we believe shapes who we are becoming. It may be that in order for you to be able to move confidently into the future, there are some things that you have believed about God that need to be put to death and brought to new life. In just a moment, the band is going to lead us in one more song that really is an anthem for us as we walk confidently into the future because our foundation is sure. But before we get there, I want to share with you a reflection that's actually something I listen to every Mother's Day for the last several years. It's something that has expanded my understanding of who God is and how God works in my life. And I hope that you'll find it to be helpful too, as you consider what it might look like for you to develop a deeper confidence in the God who knows you more than you know yourself, who has the best intentions in mind for you, and who wants to guide you toward your future, toward life. Let's take a listen.
Yesterday we went for a walk in the forest preserve, and 2 deer stood in the clearing. One grazed and wandered, took no notice of us, and the other stared at us completely still, tensed and ready at every moment. The young deer was careless, wandering, unworried, because the one who watched us was her mother. The young deer was safe because she was with her mother. And this mother deer did what mothers do. She protected, watched over, looked out for, stayed on guard over. She was looking across the field, eyes scanning back and forth, ready to protect her young at any moment, because that's what mothers do. We live in a world that draws a deep distinction between fathers and mothers. There are things that fathers do and things that mothers do, and in our world, they're not the same at all. It starts before we become parents, actually. We do this with all men and women, and before that, boys and girls. A sonogram, black and white and gray swirls. It looks like old footage of a moon landing more than anything. But in that moment, gender is spoken. Or maybe a few months later in a hospital room, and then you tumble into a world of pink, 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 or blue, 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 forever. That's how people are. We split people into pink and flowers and babies and high heels, or blue and bravado and machines and muscles. But God isn't pink or blue. God doesn't fit into our game of life pegs, tiny woman or tiny man riding around the board in a tiny sedan. God nurtures and protects and feeds his children, just like that mother deer in the clearing, with ferocity and power, ready to do anything for the children he loves. God listens and draws near. God holds and heals. God, our mother. We know all about God our Father and the beautiful images that go along with that idea, the strong, faithful, unshakable love of a father. But to know only God the Father would be like only knowing daytime, but never night. To see the sunrise, but never the gentle, haunting rise of a harvest moon, low in the sky, blood red and beautiful. To know only the Father God would be like seeing the bright, dazzling sun, but never the stars spreading out across the sky like so much fairy dust. God, our mother, reaching out to us with those hands, mother hands, strong and coursing with love, binding up wounds and soothing scrapes, holding us together, holding us safe. God, our mother, feeding us, nourishing us, giving us what we need to grow and thrive, taking care of us in big and small ways, seeing us, knitting us back together with love and grace when we've been broken. God, our mother, believing in us. It's what a mother does. She looks into your eyes and she says, I believe in you. I know you. I know you were made for great things. A mother says you're not too small. You're not too scared. You're not too frail or too flawed. You're mine. And that's all you need to know. God, our mother, whispers to each one of us, you're mine. And that's all you need to know.
Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand, when everything around me is shaking. I've never been so glad that I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. Oh, I won't be going under. Not held by my own strength, 'cause I built my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful in every
Hey, I hope you've been encouraged today and that you know that God will never let you down, that He is there and He sees you, He knows you, He cares, and most importantly, He knows about the storms and the challenges you are facing, and He wants to give you a confidence that you are not journeying alone. Now, if you'd like somebody to pray for you today, just simply text the keyword "need prayer" to 317-834-7373. A member of our prayer team would love to call you, and they will have a word of prayer with you today. And if you're a giver, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for making all of this possible with your generosity to the Joy Box. And if you want to become a giver, you can do that today by going to the Give button at the top of the screen or at crosspointweb.org/give. And know that when you do that, you're empowering this message and all the goodness that comes out of this place and the hope that you're experiencing right now. You're making that happen. You're helping people find their way to God and helping heaven be more crowded. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you. Now, thanks for joining us today. We can't wait to see you next time for part 5 of The Future You.
Christ is my firm foundation, a rock on which I stand, when everything